Do you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So I am basically representing what I presented 2 weeks ago as Thai. I'm gonna try to like extend on some topics because I don't really have the 10 minutes rule here anymore. But then it's not gonna be that long, and I thought maybe we can use the extra time to have some more questions. So this work is a feminist autoethnographic critique of technology and research when it comes to gender-based violence. And in order to better understand the critique, you need to understand a bit about me and my experiences and how I got. So this is little me. I was born in Switzerland to a very traditional South Asian family where patriarchal gender roles shaped your life from a very young age on. Honestly, at times it always felt like my destiny was set the day I was born, because I was born a girl. It was very clear that I'm supposed to grow up and learn how to cook for my husband, for his family. I need to learn how to clean and be a good housewife. And ideally, I would get pregnant very early when I'm 20 and have a son. It was very clear in our culture, in my family, around my relatives, that marriage was the main event or like the sole purpose of a woman's life. So it should not have been a surprise that once I was about to turn 20, my parents suggested marriage to me. However, it still hit me like a truck very much. I realized that even though I have been accepting all of these patriarchal structures, these really, really weird rules, and these very, very odd customs, I couldn't do it any further. That if I would agree to marry, I would have to move to Pakistan, and then I wouldn't have any resources anymore. Like I couldn't go out, I would be alone, I wouldn't have my friends, I would be very far away from family. And even though I had all of these thoughts, I just couldn't say no. It was impossible for me to speak up and say no. Because how could I? What would all the relatives say? What would my culture and society say? What about my mom's honor? Because even if I say no, everyone is going to blame my mom because she didn't teach me correctly. She didn't teach me the culture correctly. So I was always aware that it's not just my decision, it's like a family decision, right? For me to marry is not something I decide on my own, it is something that you do for your family, right? So today I'm obviously speaking from a very, very different position. I am a master's PhD student at the University of Zurich. I live on my own terms. I have agency, I have autonomy, and I live my life freely, and I love freely. I choose who I want to be with, who I want to marry. But I still carry a lot of frustration with how disappointing and times harmful technology and research has been in my journey. Still a lot of academic research, or just generally research, feels like it is done on us, as if there's some subjects or like test subjects, and less about like meaningfully with us or for us. So today I'm sharing all of these experiences as a form of resistance while holding on to the possibility of collective change. So this work is basically a retrospective autoethnography, which is based on my personal records, based on discussions and reflections I had with my therapist and also my caseworker from back then when I reached out to the NGO, but also my reflections as someone who is now a researcher who works with the gender-based violence community. So I feel like autoethnographies are not as popular in STEM as they are in other fields. However, recently in HCI, they have gained traction for their ability to surface perspectives that are otherwise marginalized in research, right? So they can offer an intimate, long-term insight into nuanced experiences, particularly when you're working with marginalized communities or hard-to-reach groups, right? Sometimes it's hard to find or I can tell you from my own research now that I work with people affected by forced marriages and gender-based violence, it's very hard to find a lot of participants and do like interviews, right? And it's also always this question of like, do I really need to find 40 people and have them reflect again about their trauma again and again? Because a lot of times the academic community wants a lot of data, even if you reach the saturation already with 12, 15 or whatever, right? And on the other hand, it's not always possible. People don't want to speak about this very sensitive, traumatic experiences they have, right? So autoethnographies, I feel like, are an amazing method to use if you have your own lived experience, where you reflect on your long-term experiences, right? So as various scholars actually say, autoethnographies can function as a feminist tool for critical work, and it is also considered an activist effort toward justice and equality by simply making visible that what is often left unspoken and unseen. So what did I do for my autoethnography? I constructed a timeline, which you can see across 3 phases. So before my crisis, during the crisis, and also after the crisis, which are marked with this colorful color. So I have always marked my crisis the day my parents proposed marriage, which is approximately here, I would say 2019. I couldn't really tell you the exact date, but around that topic, right? So everything before I would call before crisis, everything after I would call after crisis. And I reflected how during these moments, technology has supported me, hindered me, or failed me. So you might notice there is no clear beginning for the before, and there's also no clear end for the after crisis. And actually, I've had this conversation with a lot of people now. I'm not sure when the before crisis starts. Does the before crisis start like a year before the proposed marriage, or did it start the day I was born, where they already decided the things for me? And the same again for after crisis. When does after crisis stop, right? And when do you stop basically being affected by this, right? And it has been like 8 years now, no, 7 years now, and I still don't think there is such a thing as before or after or a beginning or an end. So let's look at some narratives. So I used to describe my help-seeking journey as the beginning, the day my parents proposed marriage. But when I was actually reflecting for this work, I realized that it actually started much, much earlier. So I remember when I was much younger, I think it was 12 or 13 or something, and I already felt weird about a lot of things, right? I was like, I don't know, I'm not so really happy. What's this one? I don't know where it's from. But yes, basically I would go to Google, I would write down very few sentences because I didn't really have the words for it, right? And I'm not sure what I was trying to find, what I was hoping to find, but I think now that I'm like thinking back, I think I was trying to find like help or like ways to start this conversation, right? Like, how can I approach my family with this topic? Do other people have this experience? Maybe it's a misunderstanding. How do you approach something like this? However, all I found were a lot of legal news or legal information. I found a lot of scary news where they talk about how this person was killed and this person was killed because she tried to say no, or etc., right? There was also a lot of news articles or like highlights that prompted me to like report my family immediately, that it's horrible people, you should call the police right now, right? You should like go and get them arrested and stuff like that, you know? So it was very weird for me because I myself never saw my parents as a problem, right? I always saw the culture at large as a problem because if I think about it, my mom had to do the same, right? And she had less resources. She grew up in Pakistan. She does not know any better. She's here alone. She's not really allowed a lot of freedom. Her world is that small, right? She cannot imagine alternatives to it, right? So I never really blamed my mom, but the culture, the patriarchal structures, right? And none of the things that I was finding was like speaking to me or helping me, right? And I even remember there was a moment where I thought, maybe this is too white for me. This is like too westernized, too white for me. So maybe these solutions are meant for these other people, not for me, right? There's no solution for a broad Muslim woman. This is just for white Swiss women. They can go there, they can do that, but it's not meant for me, right? And then I thought that this is like shitty information. This does not help me. I'm not risking this every night, forgetting like not useful information. So eventually I stopped searching for it, right? So after some years, I think around 2019, when my parents suggested marriage, I decided to turn to the internet again, right? I wanted to find a bit more actionable support. And this time I actually found some. So it was like 7 years have passed, tech was more approachable, more ubiquitous. So there was actually a lot of applications. I didn't know there are so many gender-based violence applications, but there are so many applications, right? However, they were not meant. I don't know who they were meant for, but they were not meant for us. It was not meant for me. It was not meant for other people who experienced gender-based violence, right? You would read these amazing articles where researchers would be like, oh, this novel app has helped 20% of women in successfully leaving their abusive relationship. Or this application has had so much impact. Like really big words, right? Like they solve gender-based violence, pretty much. And then I would go very hopeful. I would be like, yes, this is something for me. And I would try to download it. And it would never work because either they were not maintained anymore. You couldn't like, they were not updated, they were not maintained, you could not use them anymore. Sometimes they were just prototypes, so they were active for the research project, and you wrote the newspapers about it, but they didn't really last. It's really cool that it helped them for 2 weeks during the study, but like tough luck for everyone else, right? It wasn't meant to last at all. Plus, it was also very interesting because I never had a personal phone back then. It was just not a thing. Why would I need a personal phone? And actually, a lot of people who experience gender-based violence, they either don't have a personal phone or their phones get checked routinely by their partner, by their family, and etc. So how do you imagine you need to download an app that says gender-based violence support? Do you think that user is not going to see it? Or how do you imagine the situation? If I had that much freedom, I wouldn't be in that situation, right? So if I have to download something on my phone which my partner can see or my family can see, which can cause me even more problem, why would I download it at all, right? And those few apps that I did download was never like on my phone because I didn't have any. I had asked my friend, it's like, hey, can you download this to me? Because I wanted to see like, what is this amazing thing that is gonna solve my problem, right? And a lot of times, for like 89% of the time, it was evidence collection. So it was apps that would allow me to make pictures of the abuse, I suppose, and then I can report it. But that was not really what I wanted. Like, it's not the purpose. It's my purpose to like put my mom in prison for something she didn't know better, for like patriarchal structures. It doesn't really not solve the problem, right? It does not help me in the moment. It assumes that I will somehow figure it out, and afterwards maybe I will sue someone. But it really doesn't like help me any way further, right? So eventually I just gave up. I was like, okay, tech is not so meant for me. Maybe it's meant for like that's for women who have their own phones, this independence, but it's not meant for people like me, right? And eventually my friend found this competence center. It's Fachstelle Zwangsverrat, or in English, like the competence center in sports marriage. I often short it with SOSM. And she actually reached out to them, and I had this huge hesitation to actually reach out to NGOs or formal like organization, because for me, they were all the same. The police is the same as the NGO is for me the same as the Opferhilfe. They're all white Western. They don't understand my culture. If I go there, they will immediately tell me to call the police, right? So they didn't ever feel very useful to me. And I was also very scared that if I go to the NGO and I'm like, hey, I just need you to help me, I don't need you to sue me, they would do it anyway because it's the law, right? If you go to the Opferhilfe and you're like, hey, I need help, but I don't want to sue someone, it's not possible. They will do it anyway, right? So it never really felt like an option to me. So she still ended up contacting the competence center, and she talked to them. She explained to them my situation, my hesitation, and everything around it. And they were completely different. They work separately from the state, basically, and they are under no requirement to report anything I say. And it was really about what I want. Do you want to mediate? Do you want us to mediate between you and your parents? Do you want to move out? Do you want to pursue legal actions? These are all options, right? These were the options that I was previously looking for online, but I did not find them, right? So they really asked me what I want. It was the first time someone asked me. It was about my choice, my autonomy, and my agency, right? However, I couldn't just simply leave the house and go to the NGO. This didn't work like that. My parents, where are you going? It was actually not a thing. I didn't leave the house unless it was cool, right? So I would have to wait till everyone was sleeping, and then I would call the NGO, and it became the only way I could get information. I mean, not just like what should I do now, but also information such as, why is my culture like this? Am I the person who is wrong, right? I wanted validation. I wanted to understand what is happening, right? Why is it wrong that maybe this pressure is being put at me from my parents, from my culture, from my society? Because it's not just so easy to leave suddenly, right? You have been trained for 20 years to accept this, and this is your reality, and this is like your life. You're not white, you're a Muslim person, you have to do our culture, and suddenly you're just expected to be like, okay, I'm leaving, right? This is not how it works, right? So these phone calls, or the secret phone calls I had, became like really my only lifeline, right? However, as you probably can see, it made me very dependent. This was the only way I would get information. And if I wasn't able to get the space or hide and do the phone calls, I wouldn't get this information. So I always like put these two things at contrast. So while technology was ultra accessible, right? It's very easy. I could go to school and look it up, or I could ask my friend, or whatever. You can find everything on the internet. The information I found, or the support I found, was completely useless for me. It was not what I needed, right? However, the NGO managed to provide me this very specific help and support, and really support my agency. It wasn't very accessible, right? The only way to contact them was over the phone. Sorry. So eventually, after like a few months of like having these conversations, after being made more aware and being educated about like my rights, and that what I'm doing is not wrong, that, you know, this is my human right to love freely, to have my own agency, where I felt like, okay, I'm not committing some cultural crime, I'm not like the worst person on earth or whatever. I decided to leave, right? So the NGO was super nice. They organized me an apartment. They looked at my financial issues. I really had space, right, to start a new life, and I thought it is going to be amazing. However, it was nothing like I pictured, right? And I was like, I will have my own apartment. I will have like so many friends. I can go out, right? I can pursue a career that I actually really wanted. However, I was confronted with the fact that I actually had nothing at all. I had no proper education that I could choose myself. I had no plan. I had no clear sense of who I am and what I wanted in my life. And why would I, right? And everything was decided for me from the day I was born. So nobody really tells you how difficult it is to learn independence after being made dependent for so long, right? How do I even get a bank account? How will I get an apartment? How do I approach other people? How do I build a relationship? What kind of dresses do I like? Do I like dresses? Do I like to be covered? Do I like wearing the hijab? I don't know, right? And at times, I actually felt like I would not make it, that I would not survive, right? That I will fail and that I should just go back home. And there was nothing that could help me, right? There was no support. You cannot just effortlessly go to the bank and be like, can you explain it to me? Because they're going to be annoyed. They're going to be really annoyed. They will treat you like you're stupid. So that's not how it works, right? But who else was I supposed to ask? I cannot ask my family, right? I also really didn't have any friends at the time where I felt like, oh, I'm going to go annoy them with these kind of things or whatever. There was really no space. And then people always are like, you could Google it, and you cannot Google it. I don't care what other people do, you cannot. I didn't try to Google it. I tried to Google everything. But there's nothing, because apparently people think that once you leave your home, your problems are solved. That you do not have trauma, you are like fixed, it solves all of your problems, right? You're happy, everything's great, you have no, it has no impact on your education, career, identity, but this is just not the case, right? So what I did was I harassed the NGO for another 2 years by calling them whenever something was like messed up. I was like, how do I do this? Can you explain me how do I do that, right? And this poor little NGO, and I say little because they consist of 5 advisors for the whole Switzerland, right? It's not even their full-time job. And I'm not at home anymore. I didn't have like a horrible situation. But there are so many people more. And all of them are not getting any other support other than the phone call. So you probably have so many women calling them, asking them little stuff such as, how do I open a bank account? There is no other support. There is nothing at all out there. And I think this really leads me to the biggest problem I have with research, but not just research when it comes to gender-based violence, but generally research. We researchers love designing for crisis. We love it. It's the best thing to do, right? It's an amazing topic. It's flashy, right? I solved this, right? Like, I help doing that. It's catchy. It's what interests people, right? But nobody really focuses what comes before the crisis or after the crisis, right? People could have designed for education, could have designed for awareness, right? But if you look at any kind of research when it comes to gender-based violence, especially in the AIDS community, there are 0 papers. There's all different kinds of papers which are like, I made a cool app. I made a cool app for this, and I made a cool app for this. But like, what about before? Why cannot we start like much earlier on how we can design for awareness or education, or after, such as how can we support these women by regaining their identity, learning how to live an independent life, or how can we support them in getting apartments, or how can we support them rediscover themselves, right? Is it less interesting? Is it less flashy because it's not a crisis the heroes are trying to solve? I'm not sure, but maybe you should think about it when you're doing research, right? And in the case of gender-based violence and throughout the whole work that I have done, I realized that there's actually 2 things. One is that we focus on crisis, and the second thing is that we're so focused on the individual. We just love to design apps for individual people to solve their problems. Well, why was there nothing designed for the abusers? Maybe you should teach them that, right? Why was it not designed for the police officer who just, I went to the police officer and was like, hey, this is happening to me. And they were like, you're 19, just leave, right? Why are we not designing training systems or education systems to happen? Either way, why don't we design like education systems for the police officers? Why don't we design stuff for the NGOs so they are not dependent on phone calls? maybe there could be other systems, case management system, we could help them with the self-help app, maybe there is, sorry, maybe there are other digital awareness programs. A lot of this information that I was getting from the NGO could have been on the website, but they didn't do it because they didn't have a tech person. They didn't know how to do it, and it's not interesting enough for it to be researched, right? Because it's not a flashy, big problem that we heroes are solving. So in the case of gender-based violence, I made a very big point in my paper that we need to move beyond the crisis, beyond the individual. Instead of just designing for affected individuals, maybe we should be designing for the community, right? We should be designing for the perpetrators so we can learn better, or also a society as large, right? I don't think my experiences with like seeking help would have been bad if whole of Zurich didn't think it's not a problem. They just didn't think it was a problem. Someone actually told me once, oh, they didn't realize gender-based violence is a problem. So maybe we would have better progress if it was better awareness. Maybe we should have more policy things, right? And then again, it also has to start focusing on the whole journey. So awareness and prevention. How do people realize that maybe that what is being done to them is wrong before it is too late, right? Why do we have to wait till something bad happens to start designing for them? Why can't we do education work before? Then, of course, yes, there is sense in that supporting help seeking, right? We should design for that, but not just for that, and not just for the individuals. But, for example, self-help apps are cool during help seeking. It is also cool that the NGO has the ability to support me, right? And it is also cool that the NGOs between each other can work, right? And they don't have shitty tech, which is just paper-based or Excel, right? And then we should also focus what happens after the crisis, because the effects of what has happened, they just don't go away instantly. Not just with gender-based violence, generally, when it comes to trauma, it comes to marginalized communities or vulnerable communities, there always is the after, right? And I, for example, call this life repair in the context of gender-based violence, which is like, how can we support them fixing their life after what has happened? And there can be different things, right? Like, how do I find my identity again? How do I process this trauma again? The therapy, how do I do anything? Who do I want to be? Right? There's a lot of things that come up. Then I wanted to talk about the harm of abandonment and the need of sustaining research outcomes. There was a quote from one of my other research papers where someone said, being handed a broken, outdated, and non-maintained tool at the moment of need reinforces the sense that our lives are not taken seriously. So, I mean, imagine you are in a desperate situation. You go to read this amazing article how whatever solution has solved cancer, solved gender-based violence, whatever, and then you go click on it, try to download it. Well, we didn't update it in 6 years. Good luck, though. And abandonment is just not neutral. And a lot of research, I think, wants to put it as something neutral, but it is actually harm. It fractures care, it erodes trust, and it shifts the burden onto those least able to carry it. And when I started working with this NGO, or not, actually, I first joined the NGO and then I started becoming a researcher. So their trust in me was different than previously. But they actually told me about this previous research project they did with another university, which I'm not going to name, where they did this project over a year, right? And they were really hopeful. They were like, oh, this is going to solve our issues with managing cases, because they didn't have the money and they would do all of their case management, like writing down like stuff about the person on Excel, because they just didn't know how else to do it. There was no system to do it. It was the cheapest thing to do. They have a huge Excel where each row represents one person. And as you can imagine, that's not amazing. So if someone calls you in crisis, you have to open an Excel and try to find a cell where this person's stuff is. It's just very hard, right? And I also noticed it, like when sometimes I would call, they would be like, where is it? And you would see that it really disturbs like the flow. It was like difficult for me because I'm like, you need to be quick and you're trying to find these things, and also horrible for them, right? Because it's a lot of extra work for them as well to manage all of these things, right? And they had this project with this other university. They were like, hey, we'll make you a case management system, and we're going to use like this really cool approach. So it's going to take automatic notes for you, so you don't have to do any notes taking during the calls or the sessions or whatever. It will do this for you and whatever. And they actually did make the prototype, and they tested it for a week. And then they wrote this amazing paper, and there was nothing for the NGO. They didn't get the tool, they didn't get the code, they didn't really actually get anything at all other than the very scientifically STEM kind of written paper, which they just didn't understand. It was like, what are we supposed to do with this, right? The code was not shared, the artifacts was not shared. So it was actually pretty shady. And it was also very interesting because in this whole process, they included affected individuals. So people the NGO has supported to better understand the impact they had, right? And they were all very hopeful. They were like, oh, our experiences are being used for something cool, something great. There's going to be an outcome. I'm happy to share my experiences. And they were like really, really hurt and disappointed. And it was extra work for the NGO because now they have to care for them, right? It's not the researcher who's going to be like, oh, I'm sorry that you feel betrayed, that you feel used, right? It was the NGO who now ended up doing even more work, right? So sustaining research outcomes is a political and ethical obligation. It is a matter of care. It's not just important what the academic outcome is. What is the outcome for the community? What is the actual impact for the community right now? Right? And then I have the last point, which was like reflection on attending to language and power research. So a lot of times when we do gender-based violence research, you will label people as victims, right? This is a victim, it includes 12 victims. There were 5 victims who participated in the co-design workshop. And generally, the word victim positions people as passive, right? They need to be helped. They need to be safe, right? And it also kind of shapes how they are seen, how we design for them, right? Because we narrow it down to designing to fix them or fixing harm, right? Rather than supporting lives before it or beyond it, right? You're designing for the crisis. And I always cringed when I had research where it was obviously about my community, it was like victims. And also my research partners, they hate this word, they hate the word victim. They like to be called betroffene, which is like affected individual. Because they didn't want to be narrowed down to this identity. They are desperately trying to escape, right? They don't want to be this. They're trying to not be this, right? And the problem is, we researchers never ask them. I've never read a paper, I've never talked to a researcher who is like, I actually ask my participants how they want to be referred, right? You don't ask them how to refer to them in the papers. You just write, he interviewed 12 victims. You don't ask them, hey, if you want to be called a victim, you want to call a survivor, if you want to call something else. And this is not just a gender-based violence community. This really counts for everything, right? How often do we ask them how they want to be referred, right? We just fix that identity for them, usually whatever comes on this catch. So generally, the whole point of this presentation was that we need to move beyond the individual and beyond the crisis. We need to start resisting extractive research practices and start centering community voices in every step of design, from infrastructures to naming, right? And that is pretty much it. So I hope with this work or with this short presentation that we can start thinking about more research that starts with those most impacted, not spoken for, but
Me. Yeah. Thanks a lot for this amazing talk. I just want to say again, she just wrapped this up today. It was initially 10 minutes, and I really loved that you took the time, and also that you shared this vulnerable moment with us. So I think now we still have some time for questions. So does anybody have questions for Nimra?
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for First of all, thank you very much for opening up, especially as you said, like this trauma. I do have a question. What would be the practical recommendation? Because it's you analyzed a lot and you talk to people during 3 different phases. But what is practical that we can start doing as a individual?
I think so. Throughout my research projects that I have done now with the NGO, I started at the beginning to talk about what's going to be the outcome of this research. Making very clear that, hey, this is what I need academically because I am a PhD student. I'm not going to say that we can do whatever, right? We have constraints. I need to finish my PhD. The blah only gives me that much space. But I communicate that very clearly to them. And then we talk about how we can make sure that they also have a benefit out of it. Right? Like the community, or if it's an individual person, what's that benefit for this individual person, right? So a lot of times for the NGO, when we make tools, we make sure that they have a plan on how they can take it on, that they have all these materials. We usually help them find a developer who can like continue doing the work. What happens after this paper ends, right? Because this is not usually something we discuss when we work with communities, right? You come and you're like, oh, this is a research question, are you interested or whatever. Maybe we say, oh, the outcome is going to be a prototype, but are they going to have access to the prototype? We don't really discuss that. Or will you understand the prototype? Even if it's like something more like an interview study, right? We write it up in a paper format. And usually, for example, my NGO, they really struggle with like English when it comes to like very scientific stuff. So they really like it more when I make slides based on this and present it in Swiss German to them. And then we have a discussion and they can ask like, oh, you described it like that, blah, blah, blah. So they can actually benefit even from the papers where they participated with, right? It's clear to them from the beginning. And then, as I said, you can start asking communities how they want to be referred, right? Who should be included and what should we study? Because if people would ask me, I would like start searching more awareness, but we just don't get asked, right? We usually have an assumption what the community needs, and then we design for it. There are very, very few researchers that go to a community and are like, what do you want to have solved, right? Even though it's not flashy, a lot of times it's like boring maintenance work, right? But it needs to get done, right? So it shouldn't be like, what does my PhD need, or what will academia find flashy, but like, what does the community really need? And you can still make it interesting for academia, right? Like, hey, this is how you can use technology for social good. This is how you can use tech for community building, etc., etc. So it's a bit of a, I think, approach where you start centering them, the community, and what they want, how they want to be referred, and what they want to get researched.
Also a little bit of a marketing session. She will speak in the last session about one of her works, where she basically shows exactly what she was speaking about. The case mentions. Yes. Any other questions? Yes.
Thanks for the talk. People online can be too. Maybe a little bit of a follow-up question because like looking at from the research perspective, I think like it's kind of required for you, especially as PhD students, to have those papers and you have to produce something right. And often like if it's not, it doesn't follow the same flashy category, you get like punished for it. So do you have any, you probably have, but like what are your ideas to kind of incentivize this? Like, I think I have, for example, never seen a paper that is like what we learned out of maintaining the self-focus. I've never seen that. Maybe that's like what are ways that what could we do?
But it would be interesting to learn, right? But we learned from maintaining it 5 years. But maybe you don't maintain it long enough to like the study. I do understand that, and I also have like this conflict for many, many years. So when I started this work, it was very hard for me to publish the work I do, right? Because I just didn't understand how I have to sell it, right? Because people often in our community expect flashy technology design, right? And in ATI at least, which is like more of a design practice, right? I started like focusing my contribution on more what this means for the community, how we can like sustain things, and start reading up more into the design practice and see like what is needed. Like exactly this problem that you said that, oh, okay, academia forces us to wait. My friend actually wrote a paper exactly on that, and they gave her an award at Kai, which was hilarious. Like, so I feel like there are people who are starting to push these boundaries, and sometimes it's hard to be like full on pushing it if you don't have the supportive mentor or if you don't have the thing. But I think a thing we can do is, even if this doesn't make it into the paper, you can still do it for the community, right? There will be more and more people who do such kind of work, who will. I hope someone will read my autoethnographic and be like, yeah, man, I'm going to do more such work, right? And then there are going to be 2 such works or 3 such works or whatever. So it's really about like doing what you can given the constraints.
If there is no burning questions at this moment in time, I would say big thanks to Nimra again, and I think we can give her a big applause.